It's time for the Hockey Minute, your source for all of today's hockey news with some opinion. Strap in for the fastest news in the NHL. This episode is proudly brought to you by fucking nobody. We don't have any sponsors. Now, here's your hosts, Brandon and Ryan.
And here we are. Welcome back to another edition of the Hockey Minute. I am your host, Brandon. With me, as always, my co-host, Ryan. And today we have your news blast for June 2nd, 2020. But first, please subscribe with whatever podcatcher you use. Leave us a review on iTunes or a voicemail on Anchor if you're fired up about something we said or something you think we should be doing better. We'll play it on the podcast, I promise. All right, before we get into our news blast, let's check in with my social media savant of a co-host. Ryan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing really well, buddy. It's been really great getting the feedback that we've got from that interview with Brock Weston, and I had somebody message me actually and just said that they're going to actually play that interview so that Brock's story can be told to teenagers that come from troubled backgrounds, and this person messaged me just to let me know that part of the reason in some of these kids' lives is that they are closeted, and so she messaged me to let me know that hopefully Brock's story can help some of these kids and just find that courage. And so that was a really special episode, and again, thank you to Brock for coming on, because I think that's gonna, even if it changes one person's life, that's gonna be a huge thing. So
yeah, man, that's awesome.
So yeah, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, buddy. Just happy to be here. Happy to be podcasting, and happy that the NHL looks like they're at least hoping to be getting going again. So I think we should get into our news blast. So the New York Rangers moved to terminate the contract of Sean Day. It's got to be a big disappointment for the former third-round draft pick, the first exceptional player from the CHL to be a bust.
The NHL is back, sort of. The NHL releases their, quote, return to play plan, and the NHL released a 4-phase plan to return to play, including 2 hub cities yet to be determined, rules for the draft lottery, and a whole lot more.
Family comes first. Nick Foligno thinks players who feel unsafe returning shouldn't be vilified.
And Jack Eichel is sad again. Rasmus Ristolainen is sad. I think everybody in Buffalo is just sad right now.
All right, man. So let's get into it. I mean, Sean Day, he's the first exceptional player to really be a bust, and he was picked, third round, 81st overall. Was it 2016? And I mean, so even by that point, his draft stock had obviously fallen a fair bit. I mean, he's probably the lowest picked exceptional player, but still to see any player given that status at such a young age and then kind of fall from grace this far is a bit of a surprise, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Looking at his career stats, played 2018, 2019 with the Hartford Wolfpack. And then he was also that year playing in Maine in the East Coast League, and then obviously this season too, split time between the AHL and the East Coast League.
Yeah.
AHL numbers weren't that great. ECHL numbers were pretty good, 20 points in 36 games, but it's the East Coast Hockey League. Yeah. And if you're an exceptional status player, you kind of expect that. But it's pretty wild. We talked about that on the Bedard episode. Like, just because you're exceptional, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a surefire, 1,000-game career. Yeah. And Sean, I think, is now, would you say he's kind of that warning that just, don't take anything for granted if you're deemed exceptional?
Yeah, that's probably a good point. I mean, I think kind of the book on him was he was a really big body who could move, and maybe that stands out more in a league when they don't the body sizes aren't necessarily as ubiquitous as they are in the NHL, right? As far as having the man size and man strength, if you can develop a little bit early, I think you can kind of push some people around. I mean, I didn't follow his career closely enough to see his arc, but just kind of looking at his draft rankings and how people looked at him, and then how his career progressed, it just kind of seems like it was a big body that could never really put it together at the higher levels.
Yeah, I think he'll be destined for Europe in some capacity. And,
yeah,
this kind of stuff happens from time to time. Guys get, young players, they get their contracts terminated for, buyout or waivers or whatever. The reason why we're talking about this is solely because it's the first exceptional status player that's a bust, like you said. So, I mean, hopefully he can go overseas somewhere and figure his game out and maybe make a return at some point. So the NHL is back, and this is huge, man. I mean, it's so exciting to have the prospect of hockey coming back now.
Yeah.
the thing is, this is like trying to do a Rubik's Cube in 60 seconds. It's also got an atomic bomb strapped to it to try to read through how much of this is really a part of what this looks like. I mean, at first glance, what are your thoughts on hockey coming back potentially?
Yeah, I mean, first, obviously, it's really exciting for hockey to be back in general, man. I think we're all dying for any kind of entertainment and sport. And then when you actually look at their return to play plan, it's almost dizzying with with how complicated and unique this year is going to be. I mean, maybe we'll just I'll run it over the phases real quick. Phase 1 is going to be the top 12 teams per conference by points percentage will qualify. 2 hub cities will be chosen, one for Western, one for Eastern teams, and we're still undecided there. Clubs will be able to transfer up to 50 personnel, including players, coaches, and staff, so not a lot. Phase 2 set to start sometime in early June, where clubs will return to home facilities for voluntary small group on and off ice training. Phase 3 will include formal training camp, so no earlier than July 1st for that. And Phase 4 will be to resume play, so clubs in 2 hub cities for conference-based round robins and qualifying rounds, followed by the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Timing and sites still to be determined. So I know that's a lot to take in, but what are your initial thoughts when you hear all that?
Well, my first thought is thanks to our staff writer, Mark, for breaking this down, because I got to be honest, man, I just heard hockey's back and I zoned out.
Yeah.
When Bettman made that announcement, and Mark has been kind enough to kind of break everything down step by step. So
slowly and clearly for us.
Shout out to Marcus. I mean, there's so many factors to this, right? Like, I mean, my first thought when I saw the 50 personnel, or just like that's 50 bodies, right? That's not the team plus all the coaches.
Yeah.
So that'll be really interesting. I think we need to determine the guys that are maybe local already. I mean, some guys that already live in the city. There's just so much to this. And the scary thing is that all it takes is 1 or 2 guys to test positive in some capacity where that might shut down the entire thing. And I haven't heard anything about that yet, but I will say this, because I'm a basketball fan as well, and the NBA, as of this recording, the last thing I saw about the NBA was that they're trying to put July 31st down as their target for resuming play. I think that the NHL and the Players Association, Gary Bettman and Donald Fehr, they deserve a ton of credit for really hammering this thing out.
Right.
And I think that in a way, this pandemic, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I think that there won't be a lockout because of this pandemic. I think the league's already going to bleed a lot of money to begin with.
Yeah.
But for Gary Bettman, I heard an interview with him on Ray and Dreg's podcast, and he said that he was talking with Donald Fehr every day. They were just trying to figure something out. What can we do? And I think that everybody involved in this decision deserves a ton of credit, because it seems like this is it's a rock solid plan. It just, the execution is going to be the only question mark.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And just to your point about positive tests, I'm not sure if you heard the Bill Daly quote, but I just wanted to read it to you. Basically, I think it was Ryan Rishaug who put the question to him of whether or not a positive test would shut down the resumption of the playoffs. And he said, quote, "Everything depends on the facts and the entire set of circumstances. But no, we do not believe that one positive test, even multiple positive tests, would necessarily shut the whole thing down." I think that's really interesting. I wonder what their threshold is going to be, like what their acceptable risk tolerance is for it.
Yeah, but you know what? Like I said, they've got the plan in place, and that's, I mean, all we can really hope for now is for just the chance to have hockey again. And I'm wildly excited, and I can't really pinpoint why, but it's just, I feel like in a way it's almost a representation of life getting back to normal if we can have sports again.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Or at the very least, it's going to offer a welcome distraction for for a few months. So Ryan, one of the interesting questions for me that's open about this whole thing is what hub cities are going to be decided upon. And I mean, it seems like a big factor in the decision making is what states are going to have the loosest restrictions around gatherings and around allowing sports teams to have these kind of exemptions to be able to travel and do the things they need to do to play. I mean, I for example, I don't think Vancouver is going to be an option because of how strict they're kind of being with with all the rules there, but it seems like Florida, for example, could be a perfectly viable place. I mean, how do you see all this playing out? Is there anywhere that stands out to you as a reasonable landing spot for the West?
Well, for the West, I mean, Jack Manning, when we had him on, and that was in April, he was saying that the mayor was already trying to open up Vegas again. So I think it makes sense too, because the location itself, the arena is right on the Strip.
Yeah.
You could put all the players and personnel and hotels right on the Strip, and guys can walk to the arena. There's not really any risk, I think, with that. They're not too far out of the way, and so that would be my guess. And then as far as the rest for the East, like, I don't know, man. I mean, Canada, I think as a whole, has been pretty strict. As you mentioned, I heard that the Canucks are actually looking to start their training camp outside of British Columbia, just because of how strict the regulations are here. But for the East, man, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, I laugh at Florida just because that's such a Florida thing to do. Like, it's a Florida man, right? Florida men. So that would be my guess. If they're loosening up things and getting the beaches open and stuff, I think that might be good for the players too. It might give them a chance to just at least have somewhat of a bit of a lifestyle, and they're not just cooped up in hotels.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, when it comes to the teams being able to transport 50 personnel, that sounds like a lot because there's a 23-man roster. But when you start to think about training staff and black aces in the playoffs and on and on and on. So, Ryan, why don't you run down the tournament rules for the listeners out there?
Yeah, so the top 4 teams from each conference will play a round robin to determine the top 4 seeds. So same rules as the regular season games. Each team's going to play each other once to determine the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds. So in the East, we had Boston, Tampa, Washington, and Philadelphia. Out West, we had St. Louis, Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas. It kind of sucks that Boston potentially loses that top seed. I mean, on the other hand, it's good to see some teams playing important games again. And you don't want to start the playoff series without having played a game in months. I mean, everyone's going to be shaking off the rust. So I don't know. What's your reaction to this seeding?
I think it's a really bizarre way to do it. Honestly, like I'm stoked hockey's back, but it seems like they've gone one way to seed the playoff bracket, and then they're using a totally other way to determine the top 4 seeds for the divisions. And it's like it's I don't know. It feels bizarre to me. It's like for Boston to play 68 games or whatever they played, be without a doubt the best team in the league, and then still have a shot at not keeping the place that they earned, while these other teams that are being seeded into the brackets are being able to use the full weight of their season. It just feels a bit odd to me, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more impressed that you actually feel sorry for Boston, but I do think that overall, it's weird, right? It kind of reminds me of that group stage for the World Cup. And we'll do a breakdown, I think, on a separate episode of just the matchups themselves. But for some of the teams like Montreal and Chicago that were, well, I mean, especially for Montreal, they were hoping that this year they could make the playoffs, and they kind of, they had a good year, and then they kind of fell off the wagon a little bit. But for them to get in, it helps that fan base that's hungry for playoff hockey. And so I think the NHL did the right thing here by kind of, adding more teams to the pool in a way. And I think it makes it a little more chaotic, but these are unprecedented times. And so I don't think it's really wrong for the NHL to just try something different.
No, and I think chaotic is the perfect word for it. The player committee still hasn't decided what round 1 will look like. So either a bracket or having each round determined by seeding. Like there's so much up in the air about the whole thing, even though obviously there's positive forward progress, but there's still some kinks to be worked out.
Yeah, and I heard that they were thinking maybe the first round too is like a best of 5, which is again just kind of put some urgency on it a little bit to not take any one game for granted. But Who knows? I mean, yeah, we'll see how it all plays out.
All right, so family comes first. Nick Foligno is, I think he's been the most vocal out of the players that I've heard so far, kind of voicing his hesitancy towards returning to play and saying that any other players who feel that same way really shouldn't be vilified. I've actually got a couple of quotes here. He says, if you don't feel safe to return, I think there needs to be some sort of way for those guys to not be vilified. No one's going to look at you unfavorably for not wanting to go back, and I don't think they should be. If you don't feel safe because of a condition or just a belief, then you have every right as a human not to return to play until you feel comfortable about it. And then one more here. Quote, I've taken time away and been with my family for things that are bigger than hockey, and this is obviously bigger than hockey. So I would respect anyone that doesn't feel comfortable enough to come back. I also respect the guys that do want to come back. If they feel safe enough and are good with the answers, health officials in the league, that they are giving, I look at both sides and I think that that's the right thing to do. But I'm sure there will be something built in to at least respect some guys who don't feel quite as comfortable, and will support those people all the way. So Ryan, I'll ask you, man. One, did you think we're going to see some players holding out? And two, what do you think the reaction and the response is going to be? I mean, how can a team function if 4 players decide that they're not feeling comfortable?
Yeah, to answer your first question, 100%. I don't think, I mean, Nick Foligno, I think his daughter has some sort of health issue that maybe puts her at risk.
Yeah.
I'm sure that in a league this size, there's going to be players, personnel that all have kids or maybe a spouse that, I mean, it's something as simple as a spouse having asthma can be, potentially life-threatening, right? So I absolutely expect to see every team probably missing 1 or 2 guys. I do think that in some cases, some players, they will, like Foligno says, some guys are probably itching to come back. So it wouldn't shock me if some guys have already kind of isolated a little bit from their families just to make sure that they're healthy, ready to go. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as how it looks for the playoffs, I mean, I'm going to be honest, man. I don't think this is going to be like the playoff hockey we're accustomed to seeing. I think it's going to be like watching like a Div 1 men's league for the probably the first round, let the guys get their legs back and stuff. But, at the end of the day, it's just, you can't, it's not going to be perfect. And I respect Foligno for being as outspoken as he's been. I mean, he made a reference that it's a basic human right. And I think we have to remember that this is a job for those guys. And I know if my job had told me, well, you got to come back, or we want you to come back into the office, and they're going to put me in a situation that was unsafe, it's a human rights thing. I should be able to say no to that. And just because these guys are millionaires, it doesn't give us as fans the right to vilify them for not doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, you're right. Nick Foligno's daughter has had multiple heart surgeries for a congenital heart defect, and his son was just hospitalized with pneumonia last year. So, I mean, obviously those things are front of mind for him. We've also heard Bo Horvat of the Canucks speak out, saying that he's got a pregnant wife, and you can understand guys being uncomfortable. Like I'm sure. Just because we've had a couple of vocal guys speak out, there has to be a whole lot of other guys that don't feel as confident and secure in the league as those two to be able to say what they're feeling. So, I'm really, really curious to see what it's going to look like and how teams are going to respond.
Yeah, I mean, like my sister Danielle, for instance, is expecting her first child in July, and like she's been pretty much on lockdown for the last little bit here. So, yeah. And everyone I know that's had kids, my friend Eric, they just had their first child. Him and his wife had their first kid just recently as well. And I mean, it's got to be a really nerve-wracking time for pregnant women, and again for the players. That I mean, yeah, it's just all, like we said, it's just all it takes is one. And I mean, I would say even if one guy tested positive when the league does start up again, if he somehow contracts it, I would imagine that there are some guys that might just say, you know what, to hell with it, I'm going home. Like I'm gonna get tested, and if it comes back negative, I'm just gonna go home. I'm not gonna risk anything. So
yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like I read that Bill Daly quote earlier, right, saying one positive test won't necessarily stop it from the league's perspective, but who's to say that that's not the case for the players? Absolutely right.
Well, and for some of these guys, I mean, if like you got to think too, if you're gonna be like Braden Holtby, for instance, an upcoming unrestricted free agent. Yep. Like if he gets it and, has all these health issues, like potentially ruins his career. I'm just giving like an absolute worst case scenario here. Like, I don't know. I mean, some of these guys might just be like, dude, I'm in a contract year. Like I'm not going to risk anything just for that sake. So I don't know. I mean, there's so many. I'm not a doctor by any stretch, but I mean, I just feel like there's so many things that the players themselves are worried about.
Yeah.
And I'm glad Foligno's kind of taken charge and kind of been a voice about this, right? I mean, some guys have said, "Oh, we're so excited, to potentially come back. Like we're really looking forward to this."
Yeah.
But I think that there are guys that are thinking about their family first, and I'm actually respectful of that.
Yeah. Yeah, one last Foligno quote was with last Tuesday. Foligno said, "quote There's going to be a fight if somebody tells him he can't see his family when the league resumes play," and that just kind of touches on your last point. Like a lot of these guys that are the most excited, I think, are the ones that probably don't have young families at home, which we've touched on lots, right? But it's just one other variable to consider, and obviously these guys are trying to take it all in.
All right, well, dude, Jack Eichel. I mean.
Oh, buddy.
This, first of all, Buffalo Sabres fan base. I love the Sabres fan base. They're so passionate, despite being a smaller market.
Yeah.
They continually they'll finish like top 10 in TV ratings, TV viewership. And Jack Eichel had some very interesting comments regarding this, his 5-year career in Buffalo. And I'll quickly go over some of his frustration here. He says, quote, "I'm fed up with the losing, and I'm fed up and I'm frustrated. I'm a competitor. I want to win every time I go out onto the ice. I want to win the Stanley Cup every time I start a season. The fact that this team," and I'm sorry, that's an end quote here, this is my words, "the fact that this team can't even make a 2014 playoff, I feel so bad for Ike, because to me, he's truly one of the best. Like, he's an MVP caliber in the sense that he goes, the Sabres go as much as he goes.
Yeah.
If he's not playing well, the Sabres just don't have enough pieces to really pick up his slack. And I mean, there's so much to unpack here, but I'll kick it over to you. What are your thoughts when you hear a superstar player who's only 23 years old say something like this?
Yeah, I feel for him. I really do. I mean, you nailed it before. The Buffalo fan base is they're one of the best in hockey. They prop up a lot of the league, and you just feel for him to be so mismanaged for so long. Jack Eichel, though, man, that kid is an absolute stud. You put him anywhere, and he's going to be just an unreal superstar. So the fact that they're risking losing him is just wild to me. Like, obviously they're going to say all the right things and do whatever they can to try and keep him, but I mean, I don't see Buffalo turning this around at any point. I mean, we touched on this in a podcast that we haven't released yet, but there seems to be no hope in Buffalo and no sign of anything turning around. Like they've been mired in ineptitude for so long. I mean, I don't know. Do you see them pulling out of this with Eichel, or do you see them maybe looking down the road and seeing if they can do a real rebuild and a reset and seeing what they can collect for Eichel?
It's so tough, right? I mean, he's on compared to some of the other guys in the league that are his age, he's actually on a pretty decent contract. I mean, he's making, $10 million until the 2025-2026 season, which comparable to guys like McDavid and Matthews and, Mitch Marner was the same draft as Eichel. I mean, he's making more money.
Yeah.
Eichel, to me, is just a game breaker. And I think that when you look at his comparables in the league, I mean, I always just go with the 15 and 16 drafts, the top two, right? McDavid's on the Oilers. He's got playoff experience. They're going to go to the postseason again this year. Matthews has postseason experience, first overall in 2016. Laine was second in 2016, and the Jets went to the conference finals at one point. So Laine's got some experience there. I mean, Eichel is the kind of guy that I think could really do some damage in the playoffs. It's just that you're right. I don't know what they can do. And I feel like Eichel has got that much power. The only guy that he can't fire is the owners, and the ownership, from what I've been reading, is really the issue. Is that the ownership just can't seem to get it together. And for Eichel, I mean, he's gone through coaching changes almost every year, and it's just been really tough on him. So, I mean, let's say he gets traded. You're a Canucks fan. I'll ask you, what do you give up? What kind of package do you have to offer to get a guy like Jack Eichel?
Oh, I mean, isn't everything too rich? Like from the perspective of being the Buffalo GM, you're never giving up Eichel unless you can get just an absolute haul. And then for the other side, like it's almost the same reason that I don't think we're ever going to see an offer sheet of a player worth whatever it is, more than 11.5 million, that puts them into that top tier where it's 4 first rounds. It's like 4 first round draft picks. You can't. I mean, no matter how good a player is, unless it's McDavid, I just don't think you can make up for that loss unless you're the Ottawa Senators, who happens to be just swimming in draft picks or something, right? Maybe there's going to be a special circumstance, but like, I mean, we were kind of talking about this a little bit off air, like the hilarious kind of fake trades people were coming up with to get Eichel to the Canucks, and it's just like, you know, multiple first round picks and Besser and Sutter and just all this random garbage people are thinking that they can chuck in, and somehow Buffalo would accept that trade. Like, I mean, honestly, if the Canucks were to try and trade for Eichel, it would probably be Pettersson and then something else, right? Like, they're pretty comparable, but Buffalo's going to be asking for more. So, I mean, and that's not a thing that I would ever be willing to cede to. So I mean, I don't know, man. Can you honestly ever see him being moved for anything in a trade?
Yeah, it would be like a major haul. It would be like a Gretzky level haul. I mean, you're getting picks, you're getting players back, both roster players and top prospects. And
yeah,
I mean, that Ryan O'Reilly trade, they kind of got fleeced on that. I mean, the guys they have back didn't really, I mean, maybe Tage Thompson turns into a good NHLer, but
yep.
O'Reilly went to St. Louis, became the leader of that team, won them a cup, and Conn Smythe and a Selke in the same year. It's like, that's they got fleeced, right? So they have to get it right if they do trade him. To be honest, I don't think Eichel is at a stage right now where he's going to demand a trade or anything like that.
No.
It's just that it's been 9 straight years without playoff hockey. And I think that Sabres fan base, I mean, they're frustrated. The other thing I thought was interesting about this, I mean, a couple other guys jumped on, and, Rasmus Ristolainen said, I've been in Buffalo 7 years, been losing every year. I hope we're done with losing. And then Rasmus Dahlin, who was the first overall pick in 2018, said that, quote, I've been reflecting pretty much since I came home in Sweden, and especially now that we couldn't make the 24 best in the league. It's tough to be here in Sweden when all my Swedish buddies are going back and playing, and I'm staying here in Sweden and not playing. It pisses me off a little bit, actually, to not play now. It's going to be a long summer. I can take care of my body well. I can do all the small stuff. I can do all the small stuff I can to get better every day. I can be a lot better over the summer for next year. I take this as a fuel to be a lot better next year. And why I think this is interesting is this is a guy who's only in his second year. And I feel like Eichel, I don't want to say this in a way that makes Eichel sound toxic or anything. It's just that you got Eichel and Ristolainen, who have been on the team for a while now. They're saying these things, and you've got now your second-year superstar defenseman who's now going, I'm pissed off too. It's only been 2 years, but I'm already frustrated by this. It's like, well, what are we doing in Buffalo? So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. And with all these other pieces in play, man, I mean, Sam Reinhart is there, and Victor Olofsson had a good rookie year as well. I mean, if Eichel goes, do you think that the Sabres totally dismantle and maybe just have a year like Detroit had, where they just, any good roster player gets moved?
Yeah, I think that's the way that they have to go. I mean, if all you had left was Rasmus Dahlin and then Ristolainen, what are you looking at? What are we talking about here? Like, you just...
Well, no one's taken that Jeff Skinner contract either.
No.
Like, he just signed that, and he...
No, exactly. That's exactly right. To $11 million, or what is it, $8 million, 25 goal scorer is a little bit expensive, right? So, yeah, I don't know, man. I think one thing to kind of note for Jack Eichel is, like, people that don't appreciate how good he is, had Buffalo made the playoffs, I think he would have been a real contender for the Hart Trophy. Like, it's just for the fact that they were as poor as they were that he is probably not going to get a lot of votes. But I mean, he carried that team.
I mean, I'm a huge Jack Eichel fanboy. I've said that I'd take him over Matthews and Laine, obviously, and I mean, he's up there, in my opinion, with McDavid and McKinnon in terms of just how valuable he is to his team.
Yeah.
His numbers have gone up every single year. I mean, 56 points as a rookie, then 57 in 61 games as a sophomore, 64 and 67 as a third year. Last year, then 82 and 77, and then last year he had 78 points in 68 games. So he would have likely finished well past 82 points and been over a point per game again. And so, like I say, he's just a superstar talent. doesn't really get a lot of recognition because Buffalo isn't as big of a market as other places like Toronto and Edmonton, and as well as the fact that Buffalo just has been terrible. But it'll be really interesting to watch how this plays out, because the ironic thing is people usually say, "Oh, we want these guys to be more outgoing and stuff," and then some people were getting on Jack Eichel for being like, shut up, you make $10 million a year, but hockey players want to win, and this guy wants to win.
Well, you kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, but that Ryan O'Reilly trade, what precipitated that, right, was the in the offseason before, or I guess it was the locker cleanout, when he was saying, like, hockey's not fun for me anymore. Like, this isn't doing it for me. And, like, that was a real bold thing for any hockey player to say. I mean, we always talk about how bland they are, and that was a real statement. And for somebody to come out who's doing that for a profession and say this ain't good no more, I mean, I don't know, that says a lot. And I don't think that environment has changed any. So, Eichel's been stewing in that for 2 more years. Same with Ristolainen, like that.
Are you saying your tinfoil hat theory here is that Ryan O'Reilly's like texting Jack Eichel, like, say this, and then they'll trade you? Join me in St. Louis. Like, come on, man, just do it, get out.
And imagine if he came out and gave the exact same quote as Ryan O'Reilly, like, just really robotically though, like, hockey is not fun for me anymore.
Yeah. It's like read like an ISIS hostage or something like that. Like, just, please get me out of here. And then he just wrecks at Tim Hortons. No, but seriously, it's going to be really tough to watch this play out. And you know what, man? I mean, you mentioned Buffalo, and the trade with O'Reilly and stuff. Like, man, this team, I remember that McDavid draft. They were actively tanking. Like, I've never seen such an egregious tank in my life. They were trading, like, they traded Tyler Myers, and I can't remember who the other guy was, to Winnipeg to get Bogosian, and then Evander Kane, who was hurt.
Right.
And I think I can't remember. I think it was Michael Neuwirth was their goalie, and they ended up trading him. He was playing pretty good, and they traded him away, and they just brought up they brought up their AHL goalie, and they still ended up. Now, Eichel's a great consolation prize to McDavid, obviously, but I mean, this team, they've got pieces. They've done the right thing by getting these high picks. It's just that for some reason they just can't get it together. So I don't know. We've unpacked a lot here, but we'll keep an eye on this, because I mean, it would be one heck of an off season if a guy like Jack Eichel gets moved.
All right, Ryan. I think that's probably going to do it for us for the News Blast for today. Why don't you let them know where they can find us?
Yeah, guys, check us out at The Hockey Minute on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We've also got full episodes up on YouTube now, so feel free to leave us comments and let us know, maybe some episode ideas, things that you want to hear from us. And thank you, as always, for the support.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us. Thanks to everybody for listening. From Ryan and Brandon, we'll catch you next time on The Hockey Minute.
We'd like to take a second to thank you, the listener, for joining us. And a big thanks goes to our writers and production team, Jules, Mark, and Matt. We couldn't do this without you.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Hockey Minute, as well as leaving voicemails on our Anchor page at Hockey Minute. And always make sure to subscribe to whichever platform you listen to your podcasts.
That's going to do it for us. This is Brandon and Ryan. We'll talk to you next time on The Hockey Minute.
Oh boy. We're like Joe Rogan, but with a fuck ton of editing.